Welcome, everyone. Grab a seat and get comfortable. I am absolutely thrilled you're joining me for today's explainer because we are going to be looking at American history through a completely different lens. We usually study our commanders-in-chief by looking at the wars they fought or the laws they passed, right? But today, we're doing something different. We are going to examine the evolution of presidential healthcare. We're going to see how the deaths of our most powerful leaders actually map the fascinating and honestly sometimes horrifying progress of medicine. Consider this a historical syllabus unlike any other. Here is our syllabus for today. We're going to break this explainer down into 5 distinct eras: the Dark Ages of medicine, sanitation and stomach bugs, bullets and malpractice, chronic disease, and finally, modern longevity. Let's just dive right in. All right, Era 1, the Dark Ages of medicine, ignorance and bloodletting. To really understand this early period, you literally have to forget everything you know about modern hospitals. Back then, even a minor ailment was a deadly gamble. Take the case study of our very first president, George Washington. After riding his horse in some cold, snowy weather, he developed a severe throat infection. Experts today believe he suffered from epiglottitis, which is basically an inflammation of that little flap of tissue at the base of your tongue. Now, let me pose a question to the class. If you woke up with this exact symptom today, how would you handle it? You'd probably just run to urgent care and grab a simple prescription, right? Well, today it's an easy fix with a quick round of antibiotics, but let's look at the harsh reality of 18th century medicine. Back then, doctors relied heavily on a practice called bloodletting. They literally cut your arm and drained the blood right out of your body, truly believing it would somehow flush out the ailment. It's believed that Washington's doctors drained an astonishing 80 ounces of blood from him. To put that into perspective for you, that is the liquid equivalent of 6 Red Bulls. Predictably, this made things way worse. Washington actually told his doctor, "I die hard, but I'm not afraid to go," before struggling to breathe and uttering his final words, "'Tis well." And this whole era brilliantly illustrates the sheer unpredictability of life and death back then. Take this next example. This is arguably the most insane coincidence in American history. On July 4th, 1826, literally exactly 50 years to the day after signing the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson passed away, right after asking, "Is it the 4th?" Hours later, hundreds of miles away in Massachusetts, his lifelong frenemy, John Adams, also died. Completely unaware that Jefferson had already passed, Adams' incredibly ironic final words were, "Thomas Jefferson survives." Oh, and just to add to this wild historical anomaly, our 5th president, James Monroe, also died on July 4th, 5 years later in 1831. You just can't make that up. Next, let's examine our 7th president, Andrew Jackson. This guy was a notoriously tough dude. He fought in duels, he survived the first ever presidential assassination attempt, and he even beat up his would-be killer with a cane. But he didn't go down in a blaze of glory. He suffered from tuberculosis, heart problems, and something called dropsy. Dropsy is an archaic medical term for severe swelling when the body fills with way too much water. But despite his incredibly hardened, violent life, his final moments were remarkably sentimental. Surrounded by his family, his last words were simply, "Oh, do not cry. Be good children, and we shall all meet in heaven." Moving to our next module, Era 2, Sanitation and Stomach Bugs, the Perils of Water and Food. As we move further into the 19th century, we discover that the most powerful men in the country were constantly at the mercy of things we totally take for granted today: clean water and basic food safety. And this actually completely rewrites a famous historical myth. For over a century, we've all been taught that William Henry Harrison died of pneumonia because he gave a 2-hour inauguration speech in the freezing rain without a coat. But recent studies show he didn't even get sick until 3 weeks later. Experts now believe he actually died from typhoid fever or septic shock caused by contaminated drinking water right inside the White House. And then we have Zachary Taylor. During a sweltering 4th of July celebration, he tried to cool off by eating a massive bowl of raw cherries and drinking several glasses of milk. Because food safety was basically non-existent back then, he contracted severe gastroenteritis and died just 3 days later. Bad water and bad cherries took down 2 commanders-in-chief. Which leads us right to Millard Fillmore, the man who took over after Taylor's tragic cherry incident. Now, Fillmore lived a long time after his presidency before eventually suffering a stroke, but right before he died, someone offered him a bowl of soup. His final words, perfectly preserved for history, were, "The nourishment is palatable." It is literally an absurdly formal 5-star super review delivered right on his deathbed. You really have to appreciate the commitment to proper diction right to the very end. Now for Era 3, Bullets and Medical Malpractice, the era of trauma. As the nation grew, early medicine was just hopelessly unprepared to handle violent threats against the office. This gives us a terrifying picture of 19th century trauma care. Take this step-by-step case study of James Garfield, our 20th president. An assassin fired 2 shots at him in a train station. One grazed his arm, the other lodged in his back. But here is the truly tragic fact of the matter. The bullet never hit any vital organs. Garfield absolutely should have survived. However, doctors rushed in and began aggressively probing his wounds with unsterilized instruments and their bare, unwashed fingers. In the process, they actually punctured his liver. Garfield didn't die from the assassin's bullet, he died from massive infections caused by sheer medical malpractice, suffering in complete agony for 80 days before finally passing. And unfortunately, history completely repeated itself. William McKinley was shot in the abdomen, and doctors practically played a game of operation trying to find the bullet inside him. Gangrene set in, and he died 8 days later. Now Teddy Roosevelt, he was a completely different breed. When he was shot in the chest, the bullet lodged inside him, but instead of going to the hospital, he just got right back up and delivered an 84-minute speech. No way, right? But these repeated, shocking attacks finally forced the nation's hand. Because of the McKinley assassination and others, the Secret Service was finally granted full-time responsibility for protecting the president. Moving into the 20th century, we hit Era 4, the rise of chronic disease, hearts, lungs, and kidneys. So, as presidents finally began surviving basic infections and the Secret Service clamped down on external threats, a brand new adversary emerged. The sheer, crushing stress of the modern presidency began causing internal degenerative organ failure. We see this shift clearly with Chester A. Arthur, who succeeded Garfield. Arthur suffered from something called Bright's disease, which is basically a historical medical classification for severe chronic kidney failure. He ultimately died from a stroke. We're entering an era dominated by hearts, lungs, and kidneys just simply giving out. Benjamin Harrison's lungs failed from pneumonia. William Howard Taft, who ballooned to over 300 pounds while in office, eventually succumbed to heart failure. And maybe nothing captures the sheer physical toll of this era quite like this heartbreaking quote. Woodrow Wilson suffered a massive stroke while in office, which actually left him partially paralyzed for his final years. Before he passed, he remarked, "I am a broken piece of machinery. When the machine is broken, I am ready." You can just hear the exhaustion in those words. It was an era where the immense pressure of the job, coupled with aging bodies, simply broke these men down. Much like Franklin D. Roosevelt, who endured high blood pressure, heart disease, and secretly battled polio through 4 grueling terms. Which brings us to our final module, Era 5, Modern Medicine and Longevity, the century mark. Today, being president is still the most dangerous job in the world, but unparalleled security and world-class healthcare have fundamentally changed the morbidity of the office. Before we look at the positive trends, though, we do have to acknowledge the tragic outlier of the modern era. John F. Kennedy was riding in an open motorcade in Dallas when a sniper's bullet struck his head, killing him instantly. Now, we aren't going to get into the assassination theories today, but the sheer suddenness of the event completely shocked the world. At just 46 years old, JFK remains the youngest president ever killed in American history. It's a really stark reminder that absolutely no amount of medical advancement can stop a bullet that finds its mark. But following that tragedy, presidential healthcare and protection essentially evolved into an impenetrable shield. Think about this staggering number, 100. This is the age our 39th president, Jimmy Carter, reached, dying of natural causes. He hit the century mark. Think back to the very beginning of our explainer. George Washington died from a simple sore throat because doctors drained his blood. Reaching 100 years old was an unthinkable, alien concept during the dark ages of medicine. Okay, let's look at the hard data to back up this thesis. The medical leap we've taken is massive. The average lifespan of presidents in the 18th and 19th centuries hovered right around 70 years. But look at the 20th century. That average jumps to 78 years old. Thanks to the Secret Service, top-notch medical care, and modern science, men like Gerald Ford lived to 93, Ronald Reagan to 93, and George H.W. Bush to 94. The presidency is stressful, sure, but modern medicine is relentless. And finally, let's break down the ultimate morbidity statistics of the Oval Office. Throughout our history, exactly 8 presidents have died while in office. It is a perfectly even, incredible split. 4 were assassinated and 4 died from natural causes. Bullets and biology. It's a striking visual reminder of the dual threats that have always stalked the presidency. So class, as we wrap up today's explainer, I really want to leave you with a Socratic question to ponder. Knowing what we know now, knowing that a simple round of antibiotics could have easily saved George Washington, or that a sterile hospital room could have absolutely saved James Garfield, if a 19th century president had access to a modern hospital, how many historical crises could have been averted? How many presidencies would have been completely reshaped? It truly makes you realize that the history of a nation isn't just written by politics, it's written by the evolution of medicine. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking questions, keep examining the history, and I'll see you for our next deep dive.